Hello everyone, Bella Malloy here, host of Seek Travel Ride, your number one bike adventure podcast, giving you the wanderlust and inspiration to take your own bike travel adventures. I want to say a quick shout out to all of you brand new listeners and followers to the podcast. Since about Christmas time, the podcast has exploded and there's quite a lot of new fans out there, so welcome aboard. Typically in these midweek episodes, I share what it was like for one of you listeners on one day of your trip. And I have a few there to share with you, but something that occurred to me is, with all of you new fans of the show, something I'm getting asked a lot about is people are asking for recommendations about which episodes they should go and seek out in the back catalogue to tune into. So the last few days, I've actually been doing that myself and reminding myself of some of the awesome guests that I've been able to feature on this show. And what I decided to do for this week's mini episode is actually take an excerpt from one of my previous episodes and share some of that story. It's a great way for you to get an idea of the guests who've been featured on the show and also introduce you to some of the adventures that I featured, within the last 2 years. So with that in mind, this week's mini episode is going to feature part of my original long-form episode with an amazing Canadian adventurer, Tara Weir. Tara has done some monumental long solo journeys all around the world across multiple continents and countries. And this excerpt that you're going to hear is going to speak about how she first started on that trajectory, how she got the idea for bike travel in the first place. It's going to take us to some grim moments crossing one of the hardest passes in Kyrgyzstan near the Tajikistan border, her time in Mongolia, travelling on the Silk Road, and what it was like to ride in China. So without any further ado, let's drop into that episode and listen to Tara share her story. Tara, a big warm welcome to the show.
Hey Bella, how's it going?
It's going pretty good. I'm super excited to trawl back through your adventures because they're so vast, so diverse, and looking through your old blogs and your photos, I'm captivated by the experiences you'll be sharing. I want to know, your first sort of bicycle journey then, 2011, you went on an organised tour through Tibet and all the way to Kathmandu, I believe, in Nepal.
Yeah, the Friendship Highway from Lhasa to Kathmandu.
So that trip was not a solo trip. It was a trip. It was organised, I'm guessing, obviously, because you're in Tibet. That's the way to go there. That was sort of sparked through an image that you saw of, I think it's Yamdrok Lake in Tibet. You saw a photo of it and you were like, I need to go there.
Yes, so we were talking about Peter Gostelow recently because it was his photo in the second edition of the Adventure Cycle Touring Handbook that I saw. And it was him sitting with his bike facing this piercing blue lake, like the most incredible photo of a lake I've ever seen, that inspired me to go. And I thought, where is that? I need to go right now. I was so inspired by just this one photo of his that so that's how I got to know who Peter Gostelow was. I was like, oh wow, like what else has he done? He's obviously been to some pretty cool places.
I've seen this photo. I know this photo. Peter sent it to me because after I interviewed him, and I'm assuming it's the same photo because it's definitely the same lake and it's Peter and his bike. He's not facing the camera, he's facing the lake.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, it's an awesome photo, everybody.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
I often say to my guests, what you've done is inspiring and will inspire others to do something. This is a classic case in point. So you wanted to see that lake from seeing the photo and you got yourself to seeing the lake. Was that then your first very introduction into loading gear onto a bike? You were on an organised tour, so were you still travelling with luggage at that point?
So you can kind of say that didn't really count as my first touring experience because by Chinese law, we had to hire a guide and a driver. And I guess Peter was probably lucky that he got to go there right before the lockdown started and they made it mandatory that you couldn't travel independently in Tibet. Like it was always a bit fuzzy. I know that you could, I heard of people sneaking through checkpoints at night, but when I went in 2011, it just wasn't possible. You just had to hire the guide. But so that was a fully organized tour. We had our driver carrying our gear. But shortly after that trip, I did 3 months in Southeast Asia, and that was kind of my first self-supported trip. But I mean, Southeast Asia touring is pretty easy going. I think I had 2 rear panniers and that was it, staying in guest houses never cooking. So a very chill introduction to solo touring, you could say.
Chilled introduction, but that's not a bad thing. It's a stepped sort of change, and I can now see clearly the progression you've made to where you are now. You obviously like doing the thing, otherwise you wouldn't keep going this way. And I wonder, you were sparked to go to Tibet through an image that you saw. Have a lot of your journeys and the routes that you've chosen to take, have they been sparked by images you've seen or things you've heard about that you've wanted to see for yourself? Or is it just more a curiosity of totally not knowing about something and wanting to discover it in this way?
So I think a lot of it happened with that book, the Adventure Cycle Touring Handbook. Like they talked about places like Mongolia that I never really thought about going. And then I'll talk about two other women that were big inspirations to me. So Kate Harris and Melissa Yule. Like Kate Harris is a pretty successful author right now, but in 2011, they did a trip called Cycling Silk. They cycled from Turkey to India and went through countries like Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan. And these countries were never on my radar. And just looking at their photos and reading her incredible writing, that trip inspired me to sort of take on more adventurous countries. So I would say I would owe it to those two women, and their journey is what basically inspired me to go to Mongolia and start my really long trip. So yeah, I definitely owe it to those two for sure.
You know, you were talking about how Southeast Asia felt like it was easy. You didn't have to carry a lot of gear, you didn't have to cook often, and it was a really easy change. You've obviously gone through some pretty remote places where it's not easy. You are carrying all the gear and you're on rough roads that are hard to go up or down on. With those hard moments, for someone who clearly loves this way of seeing the world, do you also have those moments of not loving it in the moment and just wanting to be free of it and transporting yourself back somewhere comfortable?
Oh, absolutely. Like that's the problem with things like social media. Like we don't want just the Instagram view of a trip. Like there were some tough times. Just really intense loneliness I experienced, not in the sense where I felt afraid. I just felt the lack of connection with people was really intense. Like I remember really feeling this when I was crossing Tajikistan, even though I was talking to incredible people with no common language, I still felt, I think I was really feeling that lack of community at that point. That was really difficult. I was also sick at the time, had a really bad stomach bug. So everything just kind of compounded and I had quite a tough time there, even though like it was amazing at the same time. It was really, really difficult. I could tell you probably the toughest day of cycling I've ever had, if you want, which would have been in Kyrgyzstan.
What made it so tough?
So this was probably one of the hardest days ever. I was just recovering from some kind of stomach bug. And I was about, I think, 100 kilometers from the Tajik-Kyrgyz border. I had to climb this big pass called the Kizil Art Pass. And it's an area that notoriously has bad weather. Like you hear stories about cyclists getting almost stranded. So I really was eager to get going, but I looked up and I noticed like some very dark, kind of ominous clouds in the direction I was heading. And then any smart person would wait it out. But I just wanted to get out of there. So I decided to go ahead. And it was fine for a while. I was still feeling pretty tired from feeling sick. And then the weather just changed. It started to snow a little bit. I thought, okay, a bit of snow is fine, whatever. Put my gloves on, I got my layers. But then it got really, really heavy. First it was like, a little bit on the ground. Like then it's getting almost up to my ankles. And I'm thinking, okay, this is not good at all. And then it got crazy, crazy heavy. It was super, super cold. And I hadn't seen anybody for probably half a day. And I was really starting to worry. And obviously the only way I had to keep moving forward. I couldn't stand around. I had to keep moving. But I was like all my layers on, my puffy jacket, my gloves. And I was seriously worrying about my safety at this point. And I was so far away, there was really no turning back. Things were starting to get pretty grim in my mind. Like out of nowhere, this van showed up with a roof rack. And I was thinking, like, am I hallucinating? Are you kidding me? Like I hadn't seen a vehicle all day. And then this van just pulls up. And I'm like, what? Stop. So I'm like waving my hands to stop. And then the guy stops, comes out, and then like offers to take my stuff. And I'm just like, yes. So that was kind of surreal that man came out of nowhere to my rescue, because that's probably the only time where I was actually a bit worried about my safety. And I feel like I really messed up, because usually I'm a pretty good planner, but that was a serious moment of concern before he showed up. So yeah, that was kind of crazy. He drove me all the way up to the border. I didn't even leave the vehicle to do the border formalities because I was so cold. So I was just shivering in the front seat, and they were all super, super nice to me. And then, yeah, it was an insane amount of snow up there. Like the vehicle could barely get through it. And this is late October, so I was in the premieres a little bit late. I thought I would just about make it, but I really got lucky that day. That was definitely kind of a scary moment. You know, I'm all about adventure and a bit of challenge, but that was like, you know, you messed up, Tara. You should have really paid attention to those dark clouds and stayed put. But in the end, it was fine. I made it out, made it off that pass, so it was good.
I imagine that you've taken so much learning from that as well. It doesn't sound like you do things unprepared. You were talking there about you embrace adventure and embrace challenge. I came across a quote of yours, something you've written, which is about taking journeys solo. And you said, when you are solo, I believe that travel becomes more challenging, more raw, more real without someone by your side to provide a sense of familiarity. You are forced to give yourself 100% to the unknown. Like, that's a case there where a stranger did come to assist you, but I guess it's that the unknown, the challenge, the adventure, you have to rely on your own self and your own abilities to problem solve the challenges that have come your way, don't you?
Absolutely. It was weird. It was almost like a point of pride. Like I felt like I almost felt embarrassed with myself that I wasn't planned, because I am kind of a chronic planner. It sounds a bit crazy.
Oh, interesting.
Funny, I know some cyclists, they don't want to follow any routes. They just want to make it up as they go. But I'm the kind of person that likes to plan ahead of time and sort of know what I'm in for. Like, I'm that kind of traveler. So like, I might not be the pioneer to make the route, but I'll kind of do the research and follow behind, but still make it my own, if that makes sense. Typically, like, I've never run out of water. I've never run out of food. Never had to flag down a truck in desperation because I didn't bring enough water. I'm always a planner. So I feel like I really messed up then, and like I really should have paid attention to the signs.
If you don't know what you don't know, sometimes it takes an experience to give you that awareness that can give you that understanding. Do you think this was ignorance in a way, or?
I guess when you're in a mountain environment, you have to be prepared for anything. So it could have gone from sunny skies to crazy amounts of snow within hours. That's totally possible in the mountains. So I guess in that sense, I shouldn't be so hard on myself. But just the fact that like I knew something didn't look right. I could see dark clouds on the horizon, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm climbing a really high pass. Probably not a good idea, considering it's the end of October and the weather's getting a bit sketchy to begin with. So I think that was just jumping the gun a bit. But no, absolutely. Like, sometimes you can do everything to plan, and then things don't go your way. Like I said, if you're in a mountain environment, you have to prepare for all weather extremes. So you could have all the gear that you own, and then all of a sudden you find that you're freezing at the top of a mountain pass. But there is a bit of preparedness in that sense. But yeah, like sometimes it's true, you really can't prepare for something like that. You just have to be resilient and then use the tools that you have to the best of your ability. And obviously coming with the right gear is very important. And that all comes with experience. So I think that day it was a bit of both. It was a bit of me not paying attention to the obvious signs that it might not be a good idea, and then just being at the mercy of mountain weather. So I think it was kind of a mixture of both, really, when I look at it.
Listeners, if you're wondering how to carry your gear on a bike adventure, how you're going to strap it all on, and whether you've got a gravel bike, a mountain bike, or even a fat bike, look no further than Old Man Mountain racks. These rugged, versatile racks attach to just about any bike, making them the perfect companion for all your bikepacking or touring dreams. And here's the best part. If you go to our own link, which is oldmanmountain.com/seek travel ride, you're not just getting the right gear for your next adventure, but you're also helping to support this podcast. That's right, hitting that link lets Old Man Mountain know that you heard about them through the show, and it means they continue to support me to produce these episodes for you. So head to oldmanmountain.com/seek travel ride. I've also included the link in the show notes to make it nice and easy for you. Hit the link and let them know that you heard about them right here on the best bike travel podcast out there. Thank you for supporting the brands that support the podcast. I know I mentioned I don't want to bog down into the gear choices here, but you did take a while to come to the decision to take your longer tour through along the Silk Road. I think that was that in 2015?
Yep.
And so there was a lot of planning that went into that. I know you had taken tours before that, obviously. It wasn't like you had done nothing in between, but you knew you were going to go away for a long time. And so you did a lot of planning. Was there then, with that mindset of I've tested some gear, you build on the experience, were there a lot of gear changes that you were making to set out to the areas that you were going to? Because the Silk Road route, it's an amazing route, but it is taking you to some of the most challenging remote places as well. You know, we're talking about high altitude mountain passes, we're talking about searing heat and deserts and very isolated regions at times too. So I'd love to know how a planner like yourself plans for a route like that.
Well, this was actually it was different than any tour I'd taken before because I'd never done any actual camping on a bike tour before this one. I'd done plenty of camping for my job. So for tree planting, I'd done long distance hiking. So I was familiar with that, but it was the first real expedition tour, you could say. Again, it was going back to that book I'd call the Cycle Touring Bible, the Adventure Cycle Touring Handbook of recommended tents and then gear choices. It was a lot of stuff that I would normally take on a hiking trip, but I got a lot of little extras, a wash basin, stuff like that. I almost took way too much. I remember I took 3 pairs of shoes, which just seems really, really excessive. I had a laptop. Yeah, I had way too much. I had so much weight on that bike, it was ridiculous. I don't know how I managed with food and water loads, but yeah, I think I overdid it and I overplanned. So I actually got rid of stuff as I went.
I was going to ask, did you get rid of things as you went? What was the sort of stuff that you shelled and got rid of then? You lost a pair of shoes along the way and stuff like that?
I went down to 2 pairs, just sandals and riding shoes. I had this Ortlieb foldable wash basin that wasn't super bulky, but I just didn't really use it. I just thought it was kind of a waste of space. I had Gore-Tex socks. I know that people swear by and think they're great. They just did not work for me. They would barely keep me dry and they would just stink so much. I couldn't, just having those things stinking and drying on the back of the bike. I just couldn't deal with them. So I got rid of those. I think I had 2 sweaters and I thought, why do I need 2? Just take 1 and just extra off the bike clothes for casual use. And I realized, no, just 1 pair of pants is fine, not 2. So it's just frivolous little things like that I got rid of. And yeah, since then I've dramatically reduced my load. I don't know how much I was packing then, easily 60 pounds, 70, way too much.
Yeah, so we're talking sort of 30 plus kilos on the bike, which through that type of challenging terrain, yeah, wow. I do want to go into the details of some of that trip though, because it is a magical journey that you went on. I think of the landscapes that you took yourself to, and I was looking at the photos on your blog. Actually, a shout out. I know it's an older blog, but for people that want to see what we're talking about now, what's the website that they need to get to? And I'll link to it in the show notes.
It's followmargopolo.com, like Marco, but the play that it's a woman, Margot Polo. Again, it's very outdated. I haven't updated it in 4 years. I also have Instagram at follow Margot Polo, which I don't I'm really bad with social media stuff. I put more effort into my articles now. I don't update nearly as often as I should, but those would be the 2. I had said I update Instagram a little more than the blog, but the blog is still there just for the past trip. So that'll have that entire Silk Road trip on it.
Do you ever look at it just to remind yourself sometimes of what you've done?
I haven't in a while, but I feel like I should. Now that we're talking about it, I'm kind of feeling nostalgic and I'd like to go back there. It's because I'm a different person now. And so much has happened since then. I feel like I've just grown so much and my life has changed so much since then. It'd be interesting to go back and read through all those things because I still keep journals. I might not blog actively, but I always write on every trip, just personal journals. It's a really therapeutic thing for me to write and get my feelings out. And I know that it's only for me. So while I'm not really super active on social media, I really like writing articles. I really like journaling. So that's something I'll definitely keep up for every trip.
Your writing's beautiful. You have a great way with words, and I've read numerous number of your articles there as well, which I thoroughly encourage our readers to seek out as well. I wonder then, for that journey, knowing that you are an intense planner, what were the things that you were especially looking forward to?
I think just the really remote stretches of the trip, the sections that in the books they'd almost warn you, don't go through this stretch without a map or a compass. Make sure you're well prepared for this. I was the most excited for those stretches. And then, of course, me being the planner I am, I overplan. I have several, I had several GPS tracks. I had notes. I had everything. So I was just the really remote parts. It's hard to explain. It's almost like when you're there, you can't wait to leave because you're almost afraid that something might happen, but you're so excited to be in the moment and experience those big landscapes alone. At times there's a sense of urgency to keep going, and then other times you just basically, you're just so, it's like I've never experienced mindfulness like I have in those landscapes, just being by yourself in a huge mountain environment in a big desert. You're just really, it's just so powerful. It's just hard to describe. Like that's what keeps bringing me back. Those stretches I definitely look forward to the most. And those kind of required the most planning and diligence just to make sure I didn't run out of food, didn't run out of water. And like, I'll always encourage riders to try out those really remote landscapes, but it's important to be able to know and be aware of your own abilities in terms of your own stamina, because it doesn't matter how fast you go, but you got to make sure, like, can you get 70 kilometers and carry enough water or carry enough food? Like, are you able to make it through that stretch? So I think planning for those sections, I think, are more important than anything else, just to make sure that you have the stamina and the ability to carry enough supplies to get to the next resupply point. I think it's super important for remote areas like that.
It's almost like you want enough stamina to carry too much with you, that you over-prepared in a way that you really got yourself to between supply points then having to ration down. But then also, I guess there is the balance that you've got to, everything you put on that bike is extra load. So there's sort of like this perfection of a scale, isn't it? Of like, I want to be prepared, but I don't want to overdo it. But those big, vast landscapes, I always feel selfish because when I get to run a podcast, I ask the questions that really interest me. And I have to say the landscapes that interest me on that route, the big one there is Mongolia. Oh, it has my soul. And I don't know whether it's also the perfect mix of this big, open, vast landscape mixed in with a culture, a nomadic culture as well. Like that is the bones of that country. I really want to know what it was like during your journey through Mongolia, and love you to take me there, Tara.
Oh, absolutely. So it's definitely one of my favorite places. As I mentioned, like this was the first trip where I was really wild camping and doing that on my own. So I remember my first night out, I came across a ger. I was actually nervous to camp by myself. So I thought like, okay, maybe I'll see if anyone's in there. And like, you know, maybe they'll let me camp by their tent. And I couldn't speak a lot of words of Mongolian, but I kind of gestured like, you know, put my hands together in a triangle like a tent. Sleep gesture, like, can I sleep on the side of the tent? And it was a woman by herself, and then she invited me into her ger. A ger is like it's like a yurt, but in Mongolia. And she basically like made me a bed for the night, and there was no communication, but just the way that this woman just kind of moved about inside. I watched her cook, prepare the fire. Just so amazing to experience her life just as an observer. And just being able to spend the night, and like that immediately, all my fears were kind of shed in that moment that I could experience that. And then like she welcomed me into her home because I was really nervous doing this by myself. So like just that first night, I thought, okay, I think I can do this. I can really experience Mongolia. And then after that night, there were multiple attempts to wild camp because Mongolia is a wild camping paradise. There's no fences. You can basically camp anywhere. There's no private land. And then I had trouble because every time I put up a tent, some people would find me on a horseback, and they refused to, they try to like tell me, no, you can't camp there. You have to sleep in our gear. It's like, no matter what, like I couldn't camp. Everyone was trying to get me to sleep inside with their families. That went on for most of the trip. The amazing thing about Mongolia is that you think, oh, there's nobody around. It's this big open landscape, but it turns out there's always somebody who's seen you. There's nobody around. Then, oh, look, there's a guy on a horseback. Just shows up, or a guy on a motorbike. Just the hospitality of the people was just absolutely amazing. So like I said, like I tried to wild camp, and I definitely did more than a few times, but often someone would spot me and they refused to let me put my tent up and insisted that I stayed with them. Mongolia it was just absolutely amazing.
The special experience of being welcomed as a visitor into their ger, and like you said, just observing how they go about their life in there as well. I feel that's at the very essence of someone who wants to travel in this way. Part of you travels in this way to experience the world and observe the landscapes, but I feel there's also another part that wants to understand more about the cultures. There was a quote that I came up about I think it was on your blog, maybe it was in an article, and it was, in many ways, we humans are the same. And I wonder, that's something that you have collectively built up through your interactions with strangers on your journeys, right?
Exactly. You just noticed that. I feel like all humans kind of have similar basic needs. We need shelter, we need nourishment, we need community. And then like you meet people that have almost nothing, And you could see that it's hard to pass judgment when you're just like the observer and like the tourist coming through, but they seem like they were content, like they had what they need, even though from a Western perspective, you'd think these people are living in poverty. They don't have a very great house. They like don't seem to have a ton of food, but it seemed like at our core, as humans, we all just need a lot of the same basic things. And I think like a lot of that gets sort of distorted living in a more like capitalist type society where we think happiness is success in a career, it's a big house. But I honestly think that these things like don't give us happiness to our core. So just seeing people that had almost nothing that seemed to be very connected, very happy, makes you really look at your own culture and think, I look around and think, do we need all this? This is like a Canadian, often we can have whatever we want if you have access to it, but you think, do we really need all this? Is this really what's making us happy? So again, like I want to stress that just being an observer, I can't pass judgment on a culture because I'm merely an observer. But just from the feeling that I got and what I noticed, these people seemed like they were at peace to me. There was no stress. It was just really, really nice to see. And I think often like we get too caught up in a lot of capitalist desires here. We're stressed at work. We're stressed about things that in the end don't really matter. I think community, roof over our heads is really all we need, I think.
I wonder what country that you've travelled through probably gave you the biggest, I don't even know if it's the right word, but the biggest sense of culture shock. Where did you feel most foreign?
I will say China because the language barrier was so intense. I forgot to mention, so on my 3-month tour through Southeast Asia, I also went through a small part of China. So China was my first country riding through solo. And just like the language barrier it was very intense. And, I would do my best. I would try to speak Mandarin. I think I got, I was good at the numbers 1 to 10 and I could say like, steamed dumplings or something, but I would attempt other words and I would just get laughed at or get a lot of stares. And I remember like, because I wasn't carrying camping gear, the riding was fine. It was great, but just trying to find accommodation at night was always a big thing because I would arrive in a village, couldn't really communicate. And eventually I had all these nice people kind of following me around, trying to help me. And we'd go from hotel to hotel and people would look at me and shake their heads. And I'm thinking, what's wrong? Why can't I stay anywhere? And then I found out like a lot of hotels didn't take foreigners. They kept like, pointing at a Chinese ID card. And I'm thinking, what are they talking about? I have a passport. What's going on? This was a problem at a lot of towns that I went to. Like I had to literally walk around for an hour before I could find somewhere that would take me.
Wow.
Yeah. So being new to travel, being my first trip solo, self-supported, like that was a bit stressful at first. But I absolutely love China. It's really amazing. I love traveling there. But yeah, the language barrier and then just, like it was really quite difficult at first. So I would say that was the biggest culture shock. Just some of the mannerisms were different. I guess, being like a nice, polite Canadian, sometimes eating at restaurants are a very loud, boisterous affair, which I really liked. But I'm used to people, being mindful of. I think Canadians were too polite. We worry too much. So, yeah, like I liked it. You go to a restaurant, it was just loud and just very, very different. It was definitely a bit of a culture shock at first. So that means that doesn't mean I didn't like it, though. I did really enjoy China. But yeah, I would say that was probably the toughest time I had in that regard. I think so, yeah.
So that's where I'm going to leave it with Tara's story now. If you would like to listen to the full version of this episode, I have provided a link in the show notes for you so that you can go and seek it out yourself. In the rest of the episode, we talk through what it's been like discovering places on a bike like Australia, through America, Patagonia, as well as riding the Kenya Bike Odyssey. So I definitely encourage you to give the full episode a listen. And I will also post the links to Tara's social media accounts so that you can check her out there online as well. Now, if you're someone who tunes in to Seek Travel Ride because you absolutely love the idea of exploring places on a bike but aren't really down with the idea of camping, hauling heavy gear, or even traveling on your own, I'd like to invite you to join me on my lightweight bikepacking tour, which I am running at the end of June this year. There are still just a few spots left on this tour. It's a supported trip with 2 ride leaders. I am actually going to be one of them, And it's lightweight bikepacking, so you'll have just your clothes and essentials, but we will be staying in hotels every night. And I'm going to be taking you around the foothills of the French Pyrenees, showing you the sights, telling you about some of the history, taking you on some of the most impressive roads that this region has to offer, and also discovering one of France's absolute gems, which is the Citadel in Carcassonne. It's 6 nights, 5 days of riding, €15.50 per person, twin share. And if you'd like to join me, I have provided a link in the show notes so you can find more about that adventure and sign up. I'd love to have you on board. Now it's time to give a shout out to my special, awesome legends, you super fans who have continued to support me and the podcast by buying me some virtual copies online as a way of saying thanks for the episodes which I'm producing for you. I have received some monumentally amazing messages recently. So here's a shout out to John H, who says, I'm continuing to enjoy your guests' adventures and stories. Thank you so much, John, for being a legend, shouting me some coffees. And I'm glad that you're enjoying tuning into these weekly episodes. Next one I've got is from worldbybike_UK. And he says, hey Bella, great job giving the cycle touring community a voice. Best wishes, Ben. Thank you so much, Ben. And a shout out to you as well, because Ben, like many of my listeners, is actually currently on an adventure which is taking him all around the world. He's in Southeast Asia at the moment, having left from the UK. So shout out to you, Ben, and I'm glad that you're tuning into these episodes for a hit of your own inspiration and wanderlust while you are there out on the road. Now, listeners, if you too would like to do as John and Ben have done and show Seek Travel Ride some love, I've got the link to buy me a coffee in the show notes. Hit the link, buy me a virtual brew, and most importantly, tell me what it is about the show and tuning into the podcast that you love the most. And until the next episode, I'm Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening.
I'm Rob Pope, and we are back for another season of How to Be Superhuman from Red Bull. And this time, things are getting wild. We're climbing up vertical rock faces, blind, trekking to the furthest reaches of our planet alone, and paragliding over the tallest mountains in the world. So subscribe and listen. From Red Bull, it's How to Be Superhuman.